All right. Well, thanks everyone. I appreciate you coming in this morning and hearing what we have to say. Again, my name is Dan Griffin. I'm the Senior Director of Product Management for Hoopla. Not everyone knows this, that Hoopla is part of Midwest Tape. So a lot of people in the library have been familiar with Midwest Tape for 20 or 30 years, and so we are the digital arm of Midwest Tape. I've really enjoyed getting to know you guys at the library over the last several months. I've gotten to know Peggy here just recently, and she is quite the firecracker. She came out and visited us just a month or two ago, and a few days ago, maybe a week ago, she sent me an email. Just had one line in it that said, "It's 88 degrees here today." And in the middle of February, when I'm outside shoveling snow off my driveway, that's a fun thing to be reminded that you guys have the nice weather out here. But as I sat down to think about this presentation and think about where we're going in the future, I couldn't help but think about where we've come from and how far things have progressed. And so I thought back. This is not actually a picture of me. It very well could have been a picture of me. That is very similar to what I had, the setup that I had, this monochrome monitor. It only had shades of green, or in this case, shades of amber. It had dual floppy drives, 5 1/4 inch, right? That's how far we've come, that dot matrix printer. That was about the late 80s, early 90s. And boy, we started getting really fancy when we got a modem and we could dial into bulletin boards around town and start to connect with other people through bulletin boards. 10 years later, by 98, think about the revolution that happened from 88 to 98. By the late 90s, we had companies coming on the scene like Netscape and America Online. Amazon had been born at that time. CompuServe and Prodigy and Yahoo and Ask Jeeves, and a lot of these don't even exist anymore. But the revolution from, the ultra niche kind of nerdy topics of people in their basement playing with their mom's computer to mainstream technology. Now, there was a second revolution that happened in the following decade, and that was the mobile revolution. In 2005, they inducted a new pope in St. Peter's Square in the Vatican. And this is a view of what that looked like in 2005. And it's kind of like playing Where's Waldo to find the cell phones in that audience, right? And at that time, cell phones were things you kept in your pocket if you needed to make a phone call. And we were only just a few years past having them only in your car. By 2013, look at the next time they inducted a pope in that same spot. That's 8 years. That's a revolution, right? Look at what happened. So iPhones were introduced in 2007. Android phones were introduced in 2008. And so when this picture was taken in 2013, Apple had sold about 400 million iPhones. Since that time, they've now sold 1.4 billion iPhones. The Android manufacturers together have sold about 2 to 3 billion. So there's been about 4 billion smartphones sold in the world. There's only 7 billion people, and they've sold 4 billion smartphones. That's truly a revolution in how we live our lives day to day. Not only that, but the time that we spend on our cell phones has grown dramatically. This is the number of hours that people spend on their mobile phones in a given day. Look at, even since 2013, it's almost doubled since 2016, and I would wager that it probably went up again in 2017 and now to early 18. And the first time I looked at this chart, I thought there's no way that I spend 5 hours on my phone during a given day. And I started thinking through my day, and I thought, well, before my feet even hit the carpet in the morning, I grab my phone, and I look at my calendar, I look at my email, I glance at Facebook, maybe I take a look at the weather. So before I've even gotten out of bed, I'm probably 20 minutes into my mobile day. And as I'm getting ready, maybe I'm listening to a podcast or I'm listening to some music off my phone from those little mobile speakers, And then I'm in the car and I'm driving into work and I'm listening to an audiobook. And if I stop at a red light, I say, Siri, send myself an email. And then you send yourself an email for something you want to remember to do later in the day. Think about how revolutionary that is to how we live our daily lives. But here's the thing. Smartphones have wired us differently. We now live in a world where everything is immediate, everything is instant gratification. If you've got a song in your head, remember just like 10 or 15 years ago when you had a song in your head and you'd be singing it for a week because you didn't know what it was or you hadn't heard it in a long time? Now everything is instant. You can go to YouTube and find that clip in 10 seconds. And people don't want to wait for content. And the younger people are, the less willing they are to wait for content. So millennials, under 35, the really young ones, 18 to 26, are only 16% of them are willing to wait for content, and 25% of 27 to 35-year-olds. This was a study by the ALA. So 75% of millennials won't even consider putting their name on a waiting list. And so when we think about how we reach those people, or are we serving them, we don't even know, right? Because they are not even willing to go onto a waiting list. They'd rather take another path. They'd rather buy it or download it illegally or something else because they don't want that, that path. So we know that society is changing quite a bit, and you guys, of course, have had a front row seat to that. There was an article in Maclean's magazine, which is a Canadian news publication, and they were interviewing Pilar Martinez, and she's the head of the library system in Alberta, Canada. And what she talked about was how the library is porous. And I loved that analogy that she used in that interview, porous, because you think about a porous rock or something, you know, where the water flows in all directions. And that was the analogy that she was making with the library. And she was talking about how her vision of a library is when knowledge and technology and books and material and programs, it's all flowing in and out of the library like a porous material, where the library becomes this central point for the community. So, you know, you guys know this, right? You know that the library has changed. You know that the library continues to change. We know that the library is not just a place that you go to get books. The library is a place you come to engage. The library is a place where you come for interaction and community. In previous jobs, my coworkers have kidded me and said I can't do a PowerPoint presentation without throwing in a few kid photos. So I'll do that now. You know, my kids go for everything from using computers, yoga lessons, arts and crafts. We go to concerts. We got to watch chicken eggs hatch, and you would go every week and learn how those chickens were developing inside those eggs. And then finally, the eggs hatched, and we got to see the chickens. The last thing that my kids have discovered is cake tins. That one of our local branches has cake tins where you can, you know, check out a cake tin shaped like a race car or a butterfly or a princess or something like that and go home and learn how to decorate a cake. So my kids have been doing that. I'm a little suspicious of this one because I think they figured out that it's just an easy way to get a lot of cake. But that's something that we're utilizing our local library branches for. And so despite the fact that millennials are not willing to wait for content, we talked about that, CNN reports that millennials are becoming the biggest users of the library system. And think about what you can do when you reach millennials, because you're not just reaching them, you're reaching their young families. And those families are being raised believing in using the library as a community resource. But of course, to make room for all these new resources, cake tins and computer areas and homework zones and 3D printing labs, digital has become a way to do that. Now, there's two big models. You know, Steve talked a little bit about all the models that Overdrive is supporting. There's two big ones. You guys know this, I think, intuitively. I call this pay first and lend first. The pay first model is the traditional library model. So for 1,000 years, when libraries wanted to lend something, they had to buy it first. You have to have it in your possession before you can lend it out to your patrons, right? So they had to make decisions about what they believed their patrons wanted. They had to make decisions about, is this cost effective? So they were buying it first. Now, the lend first model was not possible when you're talking about physical goods, but it is possible with digital goods. Lend first is pay per circ. With Hoopla, you get 600,000 titles that you can offer to your patrons for nothing. So you don't pay anything to be able to offer those titles to your patrons. And it's only when they decide that, yes, I believe I would like to read that or listen to that, that's when a charge takes place to the library. And so you can reach your patrons with more content and let them drive the decisions about what they would like to read. Now, when I talk about this to librarians, and oftentimes we'll talk about the long tail, right? Because when you give patrons the ability to make the decisions, what you discover is there's a very long tail of interests. So when we talk about the long tail, a lot of times they're surprised to find out just how long that tail is. So I pulled the stats for LAPL, and I found in 2017, and this is Hoopla stats, 51% of the books that searched on Hoopla for you guys only searched one time. 18% only searched 2 times. So about 2/3 of the content that's searched on Hoopla is what I would consider niche content. And this is when you give your patrons the power to make the decision. They start going off and exploring these interests that you never know that they had, that you would never be able to fulfill one book at a time because it wouldn't be cost effective to buy something that one person wants. That's the power of the Lend First model. Now, on the high demand side, there's also a couple of interesting cases for the Lend First model. Steve talked in his presentation about some things they're doing where you want to get around these wait times for content. One of the most interesting case studies that I found is when a musical artist dies. And so I went back and I pulled some stats for probably one of the most high-profile deaths in the last couple of years, and that was when Prince died. I believe that was in late 2016. And what we saw when we go back and we look at the stats for Prince's music albums was that 30% of borrows of Prince's music, 30% ever on Hoopla, happened within 5 days of his death. That was the spike. It was coming along at this normal sort of low pace, immediately spiked to unbelievable levels, and then after about a week fell down and went back down to normal levels. So think about that. How would you service that with physical? You couldn't, right? Because in an hour, all your physical would be checked out. How would you serve that with a one copy, one user model? Again, you couldn't. But with a Lend First model, a simultaneous use model, that's something that you can serve. You can give as many people the Prince album they want immediately, and then when the demand dies back down, then you haven't put the money in up front to have 1,000 copies of a Prince album that no one wants to borrow anymore. So it's a very powerful concept. Now, of course, this also works in other ways as well. Steve talked a little bit about book clubs. We espouse that as well. My wife was in a book club for a while, and they would email back and forth and talk about what books they wanted to read next, and they get it narrowed down to about 4, and she put all 4 of them on reserve at the library, right? Because she wanted to get ahead of the queue, and I would sort of joke with her about it. She's like, well, I don't want to buy it. I want to get ahead of the queue, and if that means I have to borrow all 4, then I'll do that. But with simultaneous use with Lend First, it doesn't matter if it's 4 people or 400 people. You don't have to make the investment. You can just let them borrow that book. We also put out an editorial calendar, which I put in your packets. This helps you with your marketing, and we point out things that you may be interested in, that you may not be aware of, whether it's something like People's Choice Awards or something maybe a little more random like winter cooking that you can then promote, and we'll give you ideas for titles and collections that support that. This is one of my favorite slides here. And this is how Hoopla can help you reach in to people's homes, reach outside of your walls and into their homes, their living rooms, their workplaces, into their cars. So let's take a look at when people are borrowing things on Hoopla. This is audiobooks. The green is when the peaks are, the red is when the valleys are. So when are people borrowing audiobooks? It's in the evenings, Sunday through Thursday nights, as they get ready for their commute the next day. They're borrowing an audiobook to listen in their car. And that's happening in between 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. So probably not a time where they're going to put on their shoes and go into the library and get a physical item. The next one is movies. When are they borrowing movies? Again, it's in the prime time, evening hours, 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, with much heavier use on Friday and Saturday nights. I think my favorite one, though, is music, because I would have never intuitively thought about this. When are they downloading music on Hoopla? The biggest time is Saturday mornings, around 10, 11, 12 o'clock in the morning. My guess is they're doing housework, they're working in the yard. When else do you see green on there? And I love this. Friday afternoons, about 1 o'clock, people start looking forward to the weekend. They're just trying to power through the rest of their Friday. They download some music on Hoopla. So again, you're reaching them when they're not able to go to your physical library. They can pull out their phone, they can download music, they can get what they want inside their car, inside their workplace, or inside their home. I do want to take some time to talk about where we've come from this year and where we're going. In 2017, we focused on implementing suggestions from the libraries. Just some examples of things that we did in the library. Fixed layout ebooks, if you're not familiar with that term, a lot of times we think of picture books, or it might be a recipe book, or a photography book, a kid's book, things that's very dependent on the look and feel. We want that ebook to look just like it does in physical form. Similar to that was read-along ebooks that we now support. So for early literacy, for kids or for people learning to read, it'll read to you and highlight the words as you go. We added support for streaming devices late last year. Apple TV, Android TV, Fire TV, and the biggest one of all was Roku. We released a sneak peek of that late last year, and just a few weeks ago, we updated that to be much more a fuller functionality. And that is going like gangbusters. People are downloading that app like crazy to get mostly video, but we've also seen it for music and for audiobook titles, interestingly enough. Improved search results. We want people to be able to find not only exactly what they're looking for, but also discoverability. What suggestions can we make? What recommendations can we make based on what they're looking for to help them find something of interest? Accessibility improvements. How does Hoopla work for someone that doesn't hear well or doesn't see well? Variable speed playback, making sure that if you're an audiobook listener like me and you can't stand the idea of listening to an audiobook at single speed, that you can speed that up to 1.5 or 2x. And it becomes very comfortable once you've done that for a while, and it allows you to listen much faster than you normally would. We've made dozens of improvements in the library portal, and I don't have time to go through all those, but if you're interested, if you're the person in the library who's looking at the portal, take a look at the webinar we did in November. We've improved the way that star ratings work and the way that our patrons can rate their content to get better recommendations back from the system. We launched Hoopla Engage, which is a marketing and outreach program similar to what Steve talked about, where you don't have to have a library card, that it reaches people in the community who don't have library cards who are interested in this content and brings them into the library, right? It's an outreach tool. We also added support for dyslexic fonts. For those who have trouble reading in a typical font, we have a dyslexic font that makes it much easier to separate those letters. All in all, we made over 2,000 improvements to Hoopla in 2017. And I think of development, I've been in development for a long time, and I think of development a lot like watching your kids grow, that day to day or week to week, you don't see a whole lot of change. But when you look back at that picture from a year, or maybe even 2 years ago, you can't believe your eyes. You're like, they grew 6 inches or something, right? I mean, that's how it works in software. When you look back a year ago and you say 2,000 improvements ago, what did we look like? We've made huge, huge strides. Let's take a look forward. Some of the things that we have coming in 2018 I'm really excited about. This one is actually really similar to something that Steve told you about. This is a plugin for Chrome. Does anyone use Chrome extensions, Chrome plugins? I see, oh good, about half of the audience uses these. I use all kinds of Chrome extensions, anything from tracking a price on Amazon to storing my passwords, all kinds of things. This one actually plugs in and lets you see if the book that you're looking at on Amazon or Goodreads is available on Hoopla. And if it is, it tells that patron, hey, before you pull the trigger on buying this on Amazon, did you know that it's available through your local library? So that is coming very soon. I'm really excited about that one. It allows them to borrow it or add it to their favorites list on Hoopla as they're navigating through Amazon. We're also making a lot of changes with the way that comics work on Hoopla. Shannon and I were talking before we got started here this morning about comic book readers and what an interesting group that is because they're very loyal to comics. For example, no one would ever approach a group of books, or a library patron would never say, oh wow, what's new from Penguin Random House? You guys got anything new from HarperCollins? Right? Nobody would ever think like that, right? But comic book readers absolutely think like that. They have an imprint that they follow, and they absolutely, if they're a Dark Horse reader, would say, hey guys, what do you have new from Dark Horse? Right? What do you have new in the DC Rebirth series? And so we're streamlining the way that we do comics to be much more in line with the way that a comic book reader thinks. So if I go under DC Comics, and I've got all the imprints up there, whether it be the DC imprint, the Mad imprint, the Vertigo imprint, and then I've got my, my various series. If I want to read this certain Aquaman series or this certain Rebirth series, I can do that. And when I go inside a series, I probably want to start from number 1 and I want to work my way through. Don't sort by popularity, sort by issue number and take me to the next one. When I finish number 3, give me number 4. So those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about when we think about comic book readers, who, by the way, are very loyal to the platform and consume quite a bit of content. I talked a little bit about this earlier, and that's set-top boxes. We continue to iterate here and make huge improvements. I don't have time to demo this here this morning. I originally wanted to play you guys a video, but if you have about half of America has a streaming device. How many hands do we have in here? So well over half. So you guys are above average, right? So Roku is by far our #1 downloaded platform. And like I said, it's growing like gangbusters. It's a great experience. Take a look at it when you get a chance to connect your Hoopla account. We also want to focus more and more on accessibility, and we're making some commitments in the accessibility space this year. Closed captioning is a big deal, and we've made a public commitment that says by April 1st, there will be nothing on Hoopla that doesn't have closed captions. We've already stopped accepting new content from our vendors that doesn't have closed captions, and we're making sure that every piece of content has closed captions by April 1st. Next is those with vision impairments. How do they navigate Hoopla? We're working with an organization called the Carroll Center for the Blind, and they help us go through the app as we would if we were a blind person. What is that experience like? And I was talking with them not too long ago, and I've gotten to know them rather well. And their technology coordinator, and he and I were talking, we were talking about the iPhone. And he said the iPhone is the most significant piece of technology for the blind community in the last 30 years. Think about that. He's been blind for about 40 years. He lost his sight as a teenager, and he said, this is the most significant piece of technology in my lifetime for a blind person. Because, I mean, the iPhone or smartphones in general add things to the blind person that they would never have had before. They can walk through a grocery store, and I had to see this to believe it, that he can walk through the grocery store and hold up a jar that he can't see, and the phone will say, Jif peanut butter, 28 ounces. Or he can hold up another jar, and it'll say, Mount Olive pickles, or something like that, right, to tell him exactly what he's holding. He can hold up his phone to a printed page, and through character recognition, it'll read him what's on that page. And so when he uses Hoopla, he wants to be able to navigate with his ears just like we do with our eyes. And so as he scrolls through various options, what is that experience like for him? And can he get the audiobooks? Can he get the ebooks and have it read back to him, just like we would for a sighted person? So that's something that's very important to us, and I know that as librarians, that's something that's important to you as well. So that is about it. I will turn it back over to Peggy, and looking forward to the Q&A.